when we have what you call the manufacturers purchasing managers index, a few folks are beginning to wonder what is it all about and how does it really affect me, by the way. Let's get that explanation, how it affects you and my very good self. Damilola Kimbami is one of the economists and research analysts at Financial Derivatives, and she's starting the week with us on the commodities side. We'll talk about that then with a very hot cup of cocoa chocolate drink here. But that's a different story a little bit. Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, I love cocoa, even though I'm a little bit of a coffee fanatic. But let's talk about the PMI.
Okay.
Both from the central bank and the independent one from FBN Quest didn't come really surprisingly, not sterling really.
Yes, so from what we've seen, both indices, both from FBN Quest and CBN, they increased. FBN's own increased actually marginally from 49.2 to about 49.8, so it's still within the contraction stage. Yeah. And what we've seen is that, because first of all, PMI, you need to understand that it's the measure of the health of the manufacturing sector. So there are 5 different subsectors. One of it is inventory levels, so which is the major aspect that we should be looking at. And what we've seen is that inventory levels have been constrained, while borrowing costs are still very high at the average of about 21 to 23%. And this is in spite of the fact that it has declined from what it was at the start of the year of about 25%, but they're still very high. And also access to credit, which is another factor that is affecting manufacturers. So despite the fact that interest rates are trickling downwards, the availability of credit, because if banks are not lending, then what are the manufacturers going to do? And also aside from that, we've seen that even consumers' purchasing power has actually also been limited to an extent. So because that demand is not there, manufacturers are not encouraged to produce as much. So that's
so my stocks. So their stocks of purchases it goes into negative territory.
Yeah, so
the
that's why
output
we're
also
seeing
goes into negative territory. And of course, a corollary of that is employment. They're not going to hire new folks. Right?
Yes, exactly. So it spills over into various facets of economic activity.
So consumers, one way or the other, when we have this kind of PMI situation on our hands, what do manufacturers naturally resort to?
So what
in terms of prices?
Yeah, so in terms of prices, so definitely one aspect that has actually helped them is foreign exchange. So that has been relatively stable. The Naira has been stable at 362. So Forex availability has been there. The CBN has consistently been intervening in the Forex market. So on one hand, they have that. But the other thing is that, fine, you have the funds to bring in your goods. But again, most of them have to borrow to be able to meet some of these needs. So if they have to pay high extra interest rates, and they're not finding the demand from that. So definitely we'll see prices maybe stay relatively elevated, and which is what we are seeing now. And most likely, if it happens or continues down the line, we might see output levels, at least in terms of manufacturing output, decline. And you know, in Q1, the manufacturing sector is one of the sectors that performed well. This growth is within 1.1% to 2%. And if this trend continues, we might actually see for Q2 numbers, the manufacturing sector might actually be one of the underperformers.
In the GDP
for
numbers?
GDP numbers, yes.
Anytime that comes out in the second half of the year. That is not going to be some good news. We put that into the entire basket of the state of the economy. That's not good, because when you look at a PMI is a major economic indicator.
Yes,
in any economy anywhere in the world.
Yes,
so you folks need to watch the PMI very closely, not just about big grammar or big numbers. It all goes down to households, goes to your jobs.
And in fact, and another thing about it, because the PMI focuses on the producers, and what we're seeing is that the producer price inflation might start inching up, and if that happens, it could also drag consumer price inflation. And if you notice, of late, we've been seeing inflation decline since February last year, and in fact, even at FDC, we're also projecting it to decline further for June to about 11.1%. But what we are seeing, and that's year on year, so that's comparing June 2018 prices with June 2017 prices. But what we are seeing right now is that headline inflation might be reaching an inflection point in which it's going to bottom out and start increasing, and therefore it will start moving in tandem or in the same direction with month-on-month inflation, which we've seen has been creeping upwards.
And that's going to be a disaster.
Yes.
That's going to be a disaster.
Yes,
because we've seen even urban and rural inflation starting to converge a little bit in terms of month-on-month, and that should worry everyone. Those who are
it's a cause for concern.
It's a cause for concern when you see your urban and rural converging. And then if your headline inflation bottom and start heading up in the direction where your month-on-month is coming from, then you have a very serious problem on your hand.
I know we have Monetary Policy Committee meeting this month, so it's definitely going to come up as one of their top agenda points.
It's going to be a major cause for consideration. Before we go into cocoa production and what have you, there have been some news as far as the power sector is concerned, and I'm sure this is one issue for manufacturers to also consider. What's the news here about this on-grid and what TCN is trying to do, what the Transmission Company of Nigeria. We had this conversation about 2 weeks ago, whether they're trying to resolve some of the issues they have on their hand.
Yeah, so they're trying to start this construction of some power grids and whatnot. But the thing is that, fine, all these reforms or measures that have been put in place are good, but the constraints are still there. If you look at it, gas constraints account for close to 50% of total constraints, about 2,000. So, for instance, if total power from the grid that is supplied is about 3,000 megawatts, at least 2,000 is due to gas constraints. So most of it doesn't even get to the end users, and that is why we see system collapses. Over the weekend, there was practically almost like a power outage all over at least Lagos State. So it's a major concern because manufacturers use this, and the thing is that if power from the grid is not steady, you have to resort to alternative power.
You're not talking about diesel?
And exactly.
Looking at diesel at almost 220?
Almost 220. So finally, it declined marginally.
Yeah, you folks believe there's some good news. I don't think it's much of good news at 219.
No, at 219, it's still, as I was going to say, that it's still relatively high. Despite the fact that it declined, it's still relatively high. So that, again, is going to feed into the operating cost of a lot of manufacturers. And the thing is that if they cannot find a way of absorbing this, they will pass it on to the consumers.
Quickly, one of the bad news is external debt that is going up. $2.1 billion if we go to the global market again and do another $2.8 billion to support 2018 budget. That has a bit of implications for everyone as well.
Yes, it does. And the thing is, why is the government going to borrow internationally? Because we still have some room or some leeway to borrow from the international markets, which is fine. So another $2.1 billion. But the risk there is, again, we are exposed to exchange rate volatility. So that's one thing we have to bear in mind. And also servicing this debt. So what the government is doing is trying to refinance its domestic debt with Eurobond proceeds. It's also using it to fund the 2018 budget. So you need to look at, okay, what are the proceeds going to be used for? If they're going to be used for capital expenditure, at least you're going to get some productivity gains in return. But we need to have it at the back of our minds that there's a major potent risk, which is exchange rate volatility.